Welcome everybody to our podcast. This is we're excited about this week's podcast. I have with me Michael Rush, and he's joining us via Zoom call. All of us are getting pretty used to that actually by this point in time, right? And so this is lesson number 19, and number 18. And it's Doctrine and Covenants, section 45. It's one of my favorite sections, I think, in the Doctrine and Covenants. I'm sure it's probably one of Michael's favorites as well. We just want to remind you that we are a little bit late coming out with this. We've been having some technical difficulties with our website and some things there with the streaming website. So we've been getting that taken care of. But we're excited about getting this. We've been like I said, a little bit late getting this out here, but we're going to try to get caught up. So not to worry. So in case you are not familiar with these podcasts, if you're just joining us, this is the Come Follow Me program. We hope that you will go through the lesson and go through all of that, and go through with your ward and in your gospel doctrine classes. And so this is actually kind of supplemental. So what we're doing is we're going to take some of the things that are in the lesson, but we want to kind of drill more deep in that. And that's why I brought Michael Rush with me here today. And just a little bit, I'm going to have him kind of introduce himself, but just a little bit from my perspective. Michael Rush is one of the foremost experts on in the gathering of the house of Israel, and also about the Ezra's eagle. A lot of people have been hearing about Ezra's eagle over the last year or two, and so he's one of the first people to actually kind of break the code, if you will, of Ezra's eagle on that. So without taking up too much any more time, so again, if you have your scriptures handy, you'll want to open up to section 45. And Michael, why don't we go ahead and have you just introduce yourself a little bit here, and then also I know you wanted to start with verse 1, which is also one of my favorites here. So tell us a little bit about yourself here.
Like you said, Rada, I love studying the house of Israel, and I have ever since I was, a boy. And I just have come to realize that if you truly want to understand the events that are going to take place upon this earth in the last days, you have to understand the covenants and promises that the Lord has made with regards to the house of Israel. And if you don't, you are unprepared for what's about to happen. So yeah, I've written a couple books on it. A Remnant Shall Return talks all about the restoration of the house of Israel. And it's available. You can listen to the whole book as a podcast. Just look up A Remnant Shall Return wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can listen to the book. But it's always fascinated me, and I love this section because it is about the last days. It's about the second coming of the Lord, and it's about the incredible things that are going to transpire, and it's also about the restoration of the house of Israel. And there's depth to it. I mean, the scriptures, I think, are like an onion, right? And most of us are very familiar with the outer layer of the onion, but there are many layers, and I think we'll see that as we go through this.
Absolutely. Why don't we go ahead and get started here with verse 1, and you want to go ahead and start with that?
Yeah, so let me just read it. It says, "Hearken, O ye people of my church, to whom the kingdom has been given. Hearken ye and give ear to him who hath laid the foundations of the earth, who has made the heaven and all the hosts thereof, and by whom all things were made, which live and move and have a being." I think this is an incredible way to start out a revelation that's about the last days and what's going to transpire on the earth. This is Jesus Christ saying, hey, I have made everything. Everything that has been made, I made it. The earth and the heavens, and he says the hosts of the heavens. And I think that oftentimes we have a pretty myopic view. I mean, we think of everything in terms of this earth, and this earth is pretty amazing. I mean, Jesus Christ came and wrought the atonement here on this earth, which is special. But within the Doctrine and Covenants in section 76, it talks about Jesus Christ's atonement. Through Jesus Christ's atonement, all the sons and daughters and all the creations the Lord has made become begotten sons and daughters unto God because of what Christ did here. And I also think it's fascinating. You can't separate this revelation from some of the revelations that were given to us in the Pearl of Great Price, Moses in
Creation.
particular.
Yes.
As we
Absolutely.
get further into this revelation, you'll see that. But in Moses, we have 3 separate accounts of worlds without number being created. So you talk about the hosts of heaven. Moses sees innumerable worlds, and he's flabbergasted by what he sees. And in Moses, chapter 1, verse 29, he not only sees these worlds, but he sees each of them is called earth, and they have inhabitants on them. And he's stunned by this and asks the Lord, what have you done? What is all of this? He can't believe the grandeur of God. He's nothing.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of when the scientists put up the Hubble Space Telescope, and they took the first super deep space photograph of deep space. And what they did is they actually took one of the darkest places in the entire nighttime sky, where you can't see any light, by your naked eye. I think it was said that if you took a straw that was 18 feet long, and you looked through that straw straight up at the darkest place in the northern hemisphere sky, that's the place that they took the Hubble Deep Space first, this spectacular image. When they got the image back, they were just, like you said, flabbergasted. They were just dumbfounded, because in that image, not only was there some things, but there were actually 5,200 galaxies that could be made out in that image, in the one place, that's the darkest place in their nighttime sky. That many galaxies. I mean, how many worlds would that possibly be? It's like you say, it's innumerable, just like Moses and Abraham talk about. Yeah. Well, I think that's fantastic.
It is. It's fantastic, and we need to start thinking about, what does it mean? We think about Jesus Christ upon this earth, but what does Christianity mean to an infinite universe that is teeming with life? And how does it all fit together? And we're going to read some really cool things in this section that talk about that. So I just wanted to highlight that in the first verse, that right out of the gate, Jesus Christ is saying, I'm the creator, and I created the earth. I created the heavens,
All these different things,
and
yeah.
there's hosts of people out there. So,
yep. All right. So then, if we go ahead now, again, folks, if you've been following this podcast for a while, you know that we don't go over every scripture here. We kind of hone in on a few different ones here. I know that there was another one that we wanted to talk about here. Talking about this in verse 9. I'd like to talk about it. And even so, I have sent mine everlasting covenant into the world, to be a light to the world, to be a standard for my people, for the Gentiles to seek it, to be a messenger before my face, and to prepare the way before me. This is, as the gospel has been rolled out here, this is the standard basically that is going out. But it's interesting because the gospel and a lot of things in the gospel don't seem to really mesh up very well with a lot of things that we're taught today in the world and through our education systems. And that's one of the big issues I think that we have here, is that we need to be able to trust the scriptures. And these verses, there's a lot of things that are going to be talked about, and the question is do we trust them? Is this something we can rely on? These scriptures here. So you had a couple other verses that you wanted to talk about here in this first portion here.
Just backing one verse up to verse 8, when Christ says, I came to my own, and mine own received me not. So oftentimes, he's obviously talking about, hey, I am the God of Israel, and I came to the kingdom of Judah, to the Jews, and they did not receive me. And it's easy for us to look at the Jews and go, what a bunch of boneheads they were. Here's the God of Israel, everything they're doing every day, they're studying the law, they're monitoring their steps on the Sabbath, they're living their lives trying to virtue signal how devoted they are to the God of Israel. And then when he comes, they don't recognize
They
him.
totally recognize him. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that
Amazing.
is very important, because it's easy for us to project onto the Jews and say, yeah, they just didn't get it. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know how many times I have heard people say, hey, you know what? I don't need to understand that. All I need to do is focus on the basics, and that's all I need. And the Jews, they thought they were focusing on the basics. All I need to know is what the law is. I just need to know the 10 Commandments. I don't need to study or understand the mysteries. But the fact of the matter is, the reason that the Jews rejected Jesus Christ is because Jesus Christ is the biggest mystery of the Old Testament. He's everywhere throughout the Old Testament. And the Old Testament was designed to be a schoolmaster and teach Israel about Christ. But it's very interesting that they didn't learn about him in their synagogues. They didn't learn about him in their public schooling. They needed to learn. It's like when Christ turns to Peter and says, who do men say that I am? And he says, well, some say that you're John the Baptist brought back to life. Some say you're Elias. Some say this and that and the other. And Christ says, stop. Who do you say I am? And Peter says, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Christ says, blessed art thou, because flesh and blood hasn't made this known unto you. The Father made this known unto you. If we want to really understand the scriptures and not be like the Jews and be totally unprepared for what's about to transpire on the earth, then we need to be taught by the Father and not outsource our spiritual education to other people and be reliant on them to tell us everything that we think that we need to know. We need to get our scriptures and get with the Lord and be taught by the Spirit. And that's where the Jews went wrong. It was all outsourced to other people. And we cannot do the same thing. If we do the same thing, we cannot expect different results. We will be shocked out of our minds when the actual events of the last days occur and we find ourselves totally unprepared for what's happened, just like the Jews were unprepared. This is going to repeat.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, now, if those of you who've been kind of following us, this podcast, the about at Easter time, I released the two-hour long, presentation videos that we did about the times of the signs of the times, basically the last days timeline information. And I'll just reiterate a couple of things that I mentioned in there. A lot of people say, well, no man knows, the scriptures actually say that no man knows the day or the hour of his coming. But that doesn't say anything about the week or the month or the year of his coming, right? So it's just not the day or the hour. It also talks about how the coming would be like a thief in the night. And in fact, it mentioned that. It's going to mention that here in a couple of these verses to come up here. But if you think about if you are you have a thief come into your home, to rob you in the middle of the night, it's going to be quite a surprise. It's not something you're expecting. If you would have known that he was going to come in, you'd put bars on the doors, or had a gun ready or whatever, for the guy. But you'd taken some additional precautions, and I think that's what we're kind of talking about here. But it tells us a couple things. First off, the Lord says that we should be seeking to know the signs of his coming, which tells you a couple things, folks. Number one is he's going to give us signs. There's going to be signs. He's telling us, I'm going to give you signs, but you have to be looking for them or else you are going to miss them, right? Number two is that if you're not looking for the signs, it's going to surprise you. You're going to be completely unprepared for what is about to happen. But for those who are looking for the signs, those who are watching for the signs and looking at the mysteries and studying those things, then these things are not going to be a complete surprise to those people. They're going to know, okay, I see this happening, so I know this is getting closer and this is getting closer, and I need to maybe do some other things with my life at this point in time or whatever. And let the Spirit be the guide, but also the signs that He's going to give and He promised to give, He's going to give. He's always been a God of His Word. In First Nephi chapter 10, it talks about studying the mysteries of God. He says, if you seek, you shall find, and the mysteries of God will be unfolded. By what? By the power of the Holy Ghost, he says. This is First Nephi chapter 10, verse 19. Um,
And Rod, isn't it interesting how Nephi, I mean, that is a major theme of his writings. It's, hey, my father had a
yes.
dream, and I know that the Lord is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And if he showed it to him, I can learn that. And he's bearing testimony to us that, hey, you can do the same thing. God's no respecter of persons. If he did it to me, if he did it to the prophets of old, he will teach you as well.
Exactly. Now that part about that no man knoweth the day or the hour, that's actually coming up here in the next couple of chapters, and that's actually in section 49, verse 7. But it also says in 1 Thessalonians, okay, so here we have it in the Bible, basically, chapter 5, verses 1 through 6, it talks about the children of light. They're not going to be in darkness, and that you can know the times and the seasons. In section 106, verses 4 through 5, it talks about the children of light, that the day will not overtake them as a thief in the night. And even in Joseph Smith, Matthew chapter 1, I should say verse 39, says, mine elect shall know that the end is near, even at the doors. I'm reminded of another scripture that talks about that it will be like a woman in travail. You know, she may not know the day or the hour, but she darn well knows when it's close, right? So I think that we can know a lot about this. And here we have the Lord through Joseph Smith. Now, at the time, Joseph Smith was actually, if you remember last week, we were talking about how Joseph Smith was actually, no, it was 2 weeks ago, Joseph Smith was actually in the process of translating the inspired version of the Bible at the time when he started to have all these questions about Enoch. And there's some really interesting things here about Enoch that he talks about now in this revelation. So this is something that's obviously on Joseph Smith's mind. Apparently the Lord knows this, and so he gives him some information in this revelation. And in verse 11 it says, wherefore hearken ye together, and let me show unto you even my wisdom, the wisdom of him who ye say is the God of Enoch and his brethren. So this is God's wisdom that we're talking about here, and it's not the wisdom of man. This is not going to make a lot of sense for you if you are a geophysicist or, and you're looking at things just purely from what we have observed up until this point in our scientific understandings here. Verse 12 says, who were separated from the earth. So who is this? It's Enoch and his people. They were separated from the earth and were received unto myself. A city reserved unto a day of righteousness shall come, a day which was sought for by all holy men, and they found it not because of wickedness and abominations. But Enoch and his people did find it, and they were removed from the earth, apparently is what this is saying, separated from the earth. Now, that's an interesting concept.
Interesting.
How do you get separated from the earth today? I mean, how does that work?
Well, I mean, why are we talking about this when we're talking about the second coming? I mean, why is the Lord prefacing this with, talking about earth and the heavens and the hosts of the heavens, and then he's talking about, Enoch being lifted up into heaven, separated from the earth, and saying, and he's going to come back.
Exactly.
It's so you've got to say,
but not only is he going to come back.
What?
Yeah, but not only is he going to come back, but they're going to come back. And the earth will be as it was in the days before it was divided. Now, a lot of people have that I've talked to, they say, oh, well, that's what that was talking about when the earth was divided. It's the days of Peleg. And that means that the earth basically, Pangea, as we know it from a scientific standpoint. So Pangea was here, and then Pangea essentially just, that's when the earth was divided. The earth was considered Pangea, and it was divided. The only thing is that really doesn't work very well from a physics standpoint, because if you have all of that mass of one supercontinent on one side of the earth is going to wobble like like a tire out of round. If you've ever had a tire where it's thrown off the weight that was keeping it in balance, all of a sudden the earth was just going woof, 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 and that would be pretty incredible. So now this is something that I mentioned in that presentation over Easter, the last days timeline. But I'm just mentioning it again, and that is that from what Orson Pratt understood, Orson Pratt had heard. So this is getting multiple through many different filters, many different people here. But Orson Pratt claimed that he heard from Joseph Smith that the Earth today is approximately 1/4 of its original size. Whoa. And that the pieces of the earth that had been removed was, number one, the city of Enoch, number two, the city of Salem, and number three, the 10 tribes. And that they were all going to come, and we talk about the four corners of the earth several times in the scriptures, but the scriptures also talk about several times the four quarters of the earth. And I always thought, well, how do you get four quarters out of a sphere? I mean, that's kind of a hard thing to do. But if you consider that if the scriptures are actual and if they're real, and it talks about the four quarters of the earth, and they're going to come back and they'll be like it was in the days before they were divided. This sounds to me like the city of Enoch coming back, the city of Salem coming back, and also the city of the 10 tribes, all returning, coming back, and basically forming again the original earth. Now that's pretty hard stuff to try to explain in scientific terms, but is it possible? Will that actually happen? Are the scriptures real? Do we really believe that? Or is this figurative? Or what do you think?
I think a lot of people talk about events of the last days and talk about them in a figurative sense. But I mean, when you look at the history of the house of Israel, and that, they were thinking, when there's all these prophecies about them being destroyed, they were thinking that it was figurative, and that they were talking about a far time off. And then you get the northern kingdom of Israel that's wiped out, and then you get Judah that's wiped out. It wasn't figurative; it was literal.
Yes.
And
the same thing with Adam and his posterity. When they got to a certain extent of their apostasy, it wasn't a figurative flood; it was a real one. And everybody died except for Noah and his family. And the same thing with the Jaredites, with the Jaredites. I mean, everybody, they fought down to the last guy. And the same thing with the Nephites. Do we really think that God is going to somehow make it figurative all of a sudden? I think it's going to be the real deal here in America, the promised land of America. God does not lie. He is a God of his word.
Yeah, well, right. and Rod, if what you're talking about is true with these different segments of the earth returning, you can see why the Lord might be taking this kind of tack when he's talking about the last days, when he's talking about cities removing from the earth and the hosts of heaven. But I want to add something to that, because when we're talking about Enoch and Enoch's city, most of what we as Latter-day Saints know about this comes from the Pearl of Great Price. And I want to read the context of something where Enoch himself is talking about his own city that has already been lifted up. So the context here is Enoch is already with the Lord, and they're looking down at this earth, and they're seeing the wickedness that's going to transpire. And the Lord is talking to Enoch about what's going to happen to the earth. And the Lord begins to weep. And Enoch looks at the Lord, and, keep in mind, Enoch is in space somewhere. Okay. So he knows the Lord, and he's flabbergasted that the Lord is weeping at this one little speck of dust floating in the wind. And this is the context for this. And he says, starting in Moses chapter 7, verse 29, and Enoch said unto the Lord, how is it that thou canst weep, seeing that thou art holy from all eternity to all eternity? And were it possible that man could number the particles of the earth, so you're talking about, not even grains of sand, you're talking about breaking it down into particles. And then he goes on to say, and millions of earths like this. So what does that tell you that Enoch knows about the universe? He knows there's much more going on than we know. And if you could take this earth and all of its particles and millions of others and break those down to their particles, it's not a beginning of the number of the Lord's creations. And then, he says this, which just is astounding to me. And I think that, we need to think about this a little more than we do. This is in verse 31. And thou hast taken Zion to thine own bosom. Now, Zion was his city, the city of Enoch.
That's right.
From all the creations, from all thy creations, he says. What does that mean? Enoch is saying, you've taken Zion, my city, to yourself, and from all thy creations.
Yeah. So how special is this?
Yeah. I mean, he's saying, you have done amazing things. And my city, we're with you, and we're not alone. You've brought righteous from all of thy creations, and they're with us too. So, and you've done this from all eternity to all eternity. So the city of Enoch is much more than we think. Based off of this, if it's not only populated, I mean, the scriptures tell us in the Joseph Smith translation, Genesis 14, we learn that Melchizedek's people went up and are with Enoch. So you have Enoch and you have Melchizedek. And now Enoch is telling us that there's righteous from all the creations which the Lord has made that are with them. So again, what does it mean? What does Christianity mean in an infinite universe? When you have outnumber, we are thinking too small about who God the Father is.
We're only thinking globally.
Yeah, we are thinking,
and just our globe.
That's always been our problem. That's one of the things that I think is so interesting about this section, 45, and we're going to get back to this in a little bit as we move through that. But I just wanted to point that out, that when the Lord is talking about the city of Enoch, it's more than just Enoch and Melchizedek. It's I was talking to a sealer in the Nashville temple, which is the temple closest to me, and we were talking about the second coming, and he said, you know what? There is much more Star Wars to the last days than most people have any concept of. And when you read about the city of Enoch coming back and them being populated from all the creations of the Father, I mean, there's some really interesting things in the scriptures.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and jump into some of these signs that he says, so that these are going to be. And in other places in the scriptures, he says that he set up the planets and so forth for signs and for seasons, so a lot of things. In previous podcasts, we've talked about the kind of the three levels of covenant. There's the personal level, there's a national level of covenant, or the national covenant, and there's also a global covenant. This maybe there'd be like a celestial covenant too, as far as God is concerned, But in verse 16 it says, and I will show it plainly as I showed it unto my disciples, as I stood before them in the flesh, and spake unto them, saying, as ye have asked me concerning the signs of my coming. This is his disciples over in Jerusalem. They were asking him about the signs of his coming, in the day when I shall come in my glory in the clouds of heaven, to fulfill the promises that I made unto your fathers. And verse 17, for as ye have looked upon the long absence of your spirits from your bodies to be in bondage, I will show unto you how the day of redemption shall come, and also the restoration of the scattered Israel. Now, why does Israel need to be? We all know that Israel was scattered. Why is it important for them to be restored?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think it's really important to understand this, part of our doctrine, because it's not understood very well. We talk about the house of Israel all the time. But what does the 10th article of faith say? It says, we believe in the literal gathering of the house of Israel and in the restoration of the 10 tribes. So we have two things. We have a gathering and we have a restoration. Now, when we talk about restorations, we're not talking about things that men do. If men could have restored the gospel, then, that would have happened during the Reformation, right? But God had to do that. He had to send, his servants to the earth to restore things that had been lost. He has promised to restore Israel. Did the church have anything to do with the restoration of the country of Israel in 1948? Or did the Lord do that on his own? The Lord can do his own work. And when I love this in the Bible dictionary. If you look up Israel, kingdom of, and just look at the last two paragraphs, it says that the restoration of the lost 10 tribes will rival the exodus of Egypt. Now, that's coming from Jeremiah. Jeremiah talks about that. Isaiah talks about it. When you think about the scriptures and everything that transpired in the scriptures, the most miraculous miracles pertain to the Lord delivering Israel from Egypt, which was the world's superpower at the time. He divided the sea and they walked through on dry ground. I mean, that's incredible. Nothing like that has ever happened before. And
also, if when you think of all of the pestilences and all the things that went on there before,
fire raining down
to force
from the
the softening of Pharaoh's heart, I mean, those were unprecedented.
The Nile turning to blood. I mean, there were the heavens darkened
and the flies and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there were incredible things, but the prophets of the Old Testament are saying that the restoration of the house of Israel, Jeremiah says, in that day they will no longer want to talk about the Exodus. The only thing people will want to talk about is how the Lord restored the children from the north countries, meaning the lost tribes of Israel.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that means that not just those are obviously the lost tribes of Israel, but there's going to be some big things happen. If it is true that that Enoch and his city were taken off, and the city of Salem and the 10 tribes and so forth, then when they return, it's going to be it's orders of magnitude bigger, because we're talking about Earth scale kind of things going on here. One thing I just wanted to mention, though, about this, the restoration of the scattered Israel. Obviously, Israel was scattered because of their unbelief and their apostasy. The northern tribes were scattered to the north countries, and then some of them went into Europe, some of them went into what is now Russia, and some of them went to some place, and we don't even know where they went, but at some point they're going to return, and when they do, big things happen. We know that there's going to be a highway cast up in the midst of the great deep. There's going to be the ice is going to flow down at their presence. That sounds like a global scale kind of a situation going on there. But it's interesting, though, of the house of Israel. Now, I should say specifically the house of Judah here. So let's kind of get down to just Judah here. Interestingly enough, people have said, well, you know what? There's no way that Christ could come anytime soon, because the Israelites are not all over in Israel, and that's true. So they said, so we don't have to really worry about Christ coming until after the scattered Israel is gathered. But the question is gathered to where? Okay, because there are two promised lands. There's the original promised land, which is Adam and Eve and their posterity, where the Book of Mormon and the Jaredites and all that happened. And then there's the other promised land given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Noah and their the people over in the old world. Those are the two promised lands. So if that is the case, it's interesting to note that the Pew Research study about 5 or 6 years, no, it's probably about 7 or 8 years ago now, they actually did a study of where in the world the descendants of Judah live today. And what they found out was, I think it's 97% of all Jews, meaning specifically from Judah, actually live in one of two nations. And that is the nation of Israel and the nation of New York. No, just kidding. No, it literally it is America and Israel. That's where they are, and they're 97% gathered already. So if you're thinking, well, Christ delays his coming because he's not coming anytime soon because Israel's not gathered, let me tell you, folks, Israel, at least those that are on this earth right now, are in fact to a large extent gathered. Now that's not all of Israel; that's just Judah. So we have to still deal with all of the other tribes there, but that's not going to really be fulfilled. In fact, if you take a look at when that the gospel will be preached to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. The couple of verses before that is the return of the 10 tribes. So they're going to be a part of this. And then if you have the city of Salem returning and the city of Enoch returning, the 10 tribes returning, there's a whole lot of people returning, and they're going to be bringing their, if you want to call it their pieces of earth, along with them. This is going to be something like we can't even hardly fathom it. This kind of a thing going on here. So we're going to have to hustle through here a little bit more. So after that, then in verse 18, he talks about the temple in Jerusalem. And in verse 19, he says that it's going to, or verse 20 says there's not going to be one stone left upon another. That's the utter destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And there's a lot of stuff we could talk about that as far as was the Wailing Wall part of the original temple? Was it not? Was this the Roman fortress up there? If Christ said that not one stone would be left upon another, then the Wailing Wall if that was part of the temple, that's still there, right? So did that actually happen? If that's the case, then where mankind has placed the old temple may be in the wrong spot, and maybe it's actually over by the Gihon Spring. and anyway, we get into more stuff about that. But let's move along as far as to this. And so let's go to verse 24. It says, "And this I have told you concerning Jerusalem, and when that day shall come, shall a remnant be scattered among all nations." Now, who did the scattering of the house of Israel? Well, first it was the Assyrians in 722 BC, and they scattered the north countries. And then it was the Babylonians just after the time of Lehi, when Lehi left, and it was the Babylonians. They're the ones that scattered Israel, but then they've been scattered again over and over again over the face of the earth until there's literally the Jewish people are all over, or have been all over the earth. But now, at least the descendants of Judah are found primarily in two nations. So it says, verse 25, "But they shall be gathered again, they shall remain again until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And in that day shall be heard of," and that now there's a whole litany of things that are signs of what's going to happen. So here he talks about wars and rumors of wars. "And the whole earth shall be in commotion, and men's hearts shall fail them." Does that sound like any kind of things that are happening today? "And they shall say that Christ delayeth his coming until the end of the earth." In other words, they don't think that Christ is going to be coming, and that's why a lot of people are going to be caught like a thief in the night, because they're not looking for the signs, and they think that it's going to happen in a time that's far distant from now.
Yeah, and Rod, Christ he's giving us a very concentrated, lesson here. But when he came to the Nephites, he talked about this in much greater detail, which I think is very important for people to go back and read, because it sheds so much light on what he's talking about here. When most people think about Christ's message to the Nephites, they think about the Sermon on the Temple Mount, and the sacrament, and naming the church, and blessing the children, and those are all miraculous things. But there is a part in 3rd Nephi, and it's the part that most people skip over because it starts sounding like Isaiah. But it is it's a special message that he says, "I am commanded of the Father to share this with you." And after he shares it, he commands us to study it. And most of us have not done a fantastic job of taking him up on that. But that message starts in 3rd Nephi chapter 15, goes to the 4th verse of 17, and then picks up again in, I think, 3rd Nephi chapter 20, verse 10, and goes, continues pretty much through third to the end of the book. But
End of the book, yeah.
it's phenomenal what he's talking about. But he's talking about the day of the Gentiles coming to the fold when they reject the gospel in this incredible country that will be established on this land where the Nephites were. And what would happen to that country if they rejected the gospel? And it was all about the restoration of the house of Israel. He said, if they don't repent, I will cause a remnant of Jacob to return like a lion amongst them. There will no weapon that is formed by man will prosper against that group, and they will tread them down, and they can't do anything, and all their cities will be destroyed. And he just lists all of these things that will happen if the Gentiles forsake the covenant and forsake Christ, who is the God of this land and the God of Israel. Yeah. And it's very important for us to understand that. So that's one thing I'd like to add. And then the other thing is, when we talk about the house of Israel, lots of people, like you mentioned, when people think about the house of Israel, they think of the Jews, but the Jews are one of 12 tribes.
That's right.
And
that's right.
There's about 16 million Jews today. And just like you said, they're in Israel and they're in America, the vast majority of them. And there's about 16 million members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who are affiliated with the house of Joseph. So you've got Joseph and you've got Judah, and then you've got onesie-twosie whisperings of, other spatterings of sprinklings of tribes, but you have no bodies of these people. You've got Judah and Joseph, and you've got a massive missing portion of people. And it's important to understand that the house of Israel is really spoken of usually in the scriptures by three groups: the Jews, Joseph, and the other tribes. When Christ came to the Nephites, he talked to them, hey, you are from Joseph, the house of Joseph. And then he talks about the Jews that are over in Jerusalem. And then he says, I
got other sheep.
Yeah, there's other sheep, and I was commanded to not tell the Jews anything about this because they never asked. And we should be having bells go off in our minds when he says that. It says, because you guys, I didn't tell them about you. And I'm telling you now, there's another group of the house of Israel that the Father led away out of the land. And they're not lost to the Father because he knows taken them, not scattered, but taken them. And in 3rd Nephi chapter 17, verse
I like to call those the other sheep.
Yeah, the other sheep. And he says that night that he leaves the Nephites, he says, I'm going to the lost tribes of Israel, for they're not lost. And so we had in 34 AD, you had Christ ministering to a body of the Jews. You had Christ ministering to a body of Joseph. And you had him ministering to a body of the lost tribes of Israel that we know nothing about. But we do know that the Jews wrote their record, Joseph wrote their record, and we know that the lost tribes of Israel wrote their record. And all of them will be combined when they return in the last days. There's something that we're not thinking about.
And they're going to bring their prophets and so forth. Well, let me tell you, if there was a people who had prophets today, why wouldn't we know it? If they were here on this earth, we would know that, wouldn't we? And also, you kind of alluded to this, but let me just kind of make it a little bit. If you had 12 kids, okay, and 10 of them all just took off and went to some other place, and the other 2 of them are hanging around and so forth. Would you expect that you would have the same number of kids from the other 10 as you have from the other 2 hanging around and doing that? I mean, the bottom line is that even though some of the other 10 tribes have been found in places like Russia and so forth, I mean, look at Russia's population. I mean, it's tiny in comparison, for example, with with India or with China. The Russian the number of people per square mile is like it's minuscule. So there's a whole, you should have, if you have 10 groups of people, or 10 families over here, and you have 2 families over here, what should have the biggest population?
Well, and
The
you
other one
look at what
you would
happened to
expect to be 5 times bigger. What's that?
well, the how many times have the Jews had their population greatly reduced, and Joseph as
Yes.
well? What if this group went somewhere and kept the covenants of the Lord? What might they be today?
Yeah.
They could dwarf us.
Yeah, hundreds of billions of people. Yes, instead of just a few. A few. So okay, so if we go back to verse 27, and the love of men shall wax cold, and iniquity shall abound. As I think of the love of men waxing cold, I think you could take it man as meaning mankind. I think this could be both men and women, but I think that this is also could be just taken as men. The men of the world their love is going to wax cold. They no longer have natural affection. They because of all kinds of things like pornography and other things that this they don't love each other as much, and they don't love their wives in maybe the same kind of a way. And this waxing cold. Any other thoughts on that, Michael?
Just read the comments on any article on the internet and see how people treat one another. I mean, it's 0 to 60. I mean, the kinds of things that people just spew out at other people, there is no common decency. There is no filter. It's just unfiltered hatred, and I mean, that also, Nephi said, Satan would rage in the hearts of the children of men in this day. And you look at what's going on, there is so much rage. And I believe there's this it's engineered social distress, that, we are supposed to be at each other's throats. Races and religions, and I mean, it's not right. Doesn't have anything to do with the gospel. Contention is not of me, the Lord said. We should, when the God of Israel says all the law and the prophets can be summarized in 2 things: love God and love each other.
Love your neighbor.
So we're not doing that. There is hate. The love of men has waxed cold.
Yeah, I would have to say that's probably it's more prevalent and more in your face today than really any other time in history, I would think. In verse 28 it says, and when the times of the Gentiles has come in, a light shall break forth among them that sit in darkness, and it shall be the fullness of my gospel. So this is another sign that the fullness of the gospel is going to be here. In verse 29 it says, but they receive it not, for they perceive not the light, and they turn their hearts from me. And why? Because of the precepts of men. This precepts of men concept is one that I have I've talked about extensively, involving the philosophies of men, essentially. A lot of the different things that we have been taught about this earth, about the nature of God, has been completely misunderstood, or literally have, these falsehoods have been perpetuated because people just got around each other and kind of decided, okay, let's have the Council of Nicene. Let's just all decide. We're going to all sit down and we're going to decide what God is and who He is and what's the nature of God. He's everywhere, but He's nowhere. He can dwell in your heart, but He fills the entire universe. All of these different concepts are interesting, but they're not what Joseph Smith saw in that grove of trees early in the spring of 1820. And so these precepts of men, these philosophies of men, I think that you're going to find out that they are much more prevalent and pervasive than we've ever thought that they were. That even the very basics of science, for example, and what we understand of the universe and what we understand of this earth, the idea that this is a big ball of molten magma, that's going around a sun and so forth, that this is how the earth was actually formed, was through the concepts that are being brought out through the volcanism and all this kind of stuff. It's not what the scriptures say, And we have to, at some point in time, return back to what the scriptures say and say, this is what the scriptures say, and this is going to be ultimately when all is said and done and we're on the other side and we can see everything clearly. I think we're going to see that the scriptures were much more literal and exacting than we ever thought while we were here on this earth.
Yeah. And one more thing on that. I mean, we've heard the phrase, the philosophies of men mingled with scripture, right? So you've got these precepts of men, but then you're introducing gospel concepts into them, like love. I mean, we see this today, like where, I mean, it's the gospel has always been about loving your neighbor, right? Just like, Christ said, you could summarize it by loving. God is love, right? So you take this concept of love and you morph it into, hey, anything goes. You have to accept everything, every behavior, because it's love. This is love. And it's a, it's the philosophies of men mingled with scripture and presented to this rising generation who has swallowed this hook, line, and sinker. And now, it's so many people are totally confused because of this new morality that really is just the old morality repackaged and remarketed to us. And it's very hard for generations that didn't see a more innocent world that we saw when we were growing up. And now all they see is this anything goes, and the only real morality is accepting, whatever anybody wants to do.
Well, I was reminded about that last night. So last night there was my dear friend Kels Goodman. He runs the LDS, or did run the LDS Film Festival. He just had a premiere of a show. What was it called? Quarantine for Two. Okay, is what it was. And by the way, highly recommend the show. It's awesome. Again, it's Quarantine for Two. Hopefully, it'll be coming out in some different formats and so forth. But in the show, it almost felt odd that this couple is falling in love, and there's this heightened sense they have this high attraction for each other and so forth, and it kind of culminates in this kiss. I mean, that's a kiss. That's it. I mean, you can't. We've gotten so conditioned that it goes way beyond a kiss. When they have this physical attraction kind of thing going on. And it was just so refreshing to actually see, because we used to see that all the time in the shows and things that were coming on TV. The innocence of prior generations compared to what we now have with everything, and everything goes, and it's just crazy. All right, so we need to wrap this up here a little bit. So let's see. Verse 31, and there shall be men standing in that generation that shall not pass until they shall see an overflowing scourge, and a desolating sickness shall cover the land. That sounds interesting, but do you think that's COVID?
I don't think that's COVID. Yeah.
I don't either.
And I had COVID.
I think it's a
it
precursor. I think it's a precursor of things to come. In fact, there are scriptures that actually talk about that there will be scourge after scourge after scourge.
I mean, there's scriptures
first
that
of
talk
several.
about, the last days being, trials and tribulations coming that will be worse than any time since the creation, or any time since there was a nation. I mean, when I think of those kinds of things, COVID does not come to mind.
No, I mean, what was it? Was it a major event on the earth? Well, yeah, it was, but a lot of it was because of the reaction to it. Almost more so. I mean, nowhere near the numbers of any of the other really pandemics and things, which I guess you could say, well, it's because we took all these precautions. But actually, I think that the ones coming up are going to be much worse than than this one was. In verse C, this is an interesting one. In verse 32, my disciples shall stand in holy places and shall not be moved, but among the wicked men shall lift up their voices, curse God, and die. I think that is such an interesting way of putting this. They're basically going to blame these calamities on God. It was because of God. God did this, which is interesting when you consider that so many people don't even believe in God. But it's like they say that there's no atheists in foxholes, right? In war, basically. So when the chips are down, people turn to God, and a lot of times they turn to God in a way that tries to draw closer to Him. But it's really interesting in this particular case. They're going to curse God and die. So they are totally going to blame God for what's been going on, and even in the very throes of dying, they're not going to turn their hearts and their minds back to God. They're going to curse Him. Verse. Did you have something to say on that?
Well, it just reminded me of the Jaredites. They did that. The Lamanites, the Nephites. I mean, when their societies just devolved, and they were just the basest of people, they were cursing God and then just wanting to die. All joy was gone. And, if that's going to happen again, it means we're going to see similar things ourselves.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, okay, let's go to verse 33. And there shall be earthquakes in diverse places. And obviously we know about earthquake frequency and so forth is quite up. And when we had earthquakes even in Salt Lake City. And many desolations, yet men will harden their hearts against me, and they will take up the sword one against another, and they will kill one another. So, it sounds like war, but it also is interesting. So many times in the promised land of America, at least, if you take the Jaredites, what civilization came in and wiped out the Jaredites? There was no other civilization. In fact, there was no other civilization at the time that could probably even take on the Jaredites. They wiped out each other from within. They turned on each other. The same thing happened again there with the Nephites and the Lamanites. They turned on each other. The family of Lehi turned on each other and killed off all of the Nephites, except for those who would go over. Do you think that might happen again this last time, this last cleansing of the promised land? Do you think that that the Lord might have the people of the promised land turn on each other and kill each other?
Later on in this section, it talks about, hey, anyone who doesn't want to take up the sword against their neighbor is going to have to flee to Zion. And Zion is going to have to be created in this environment. And I think, it's going to be very similar to what happened with Enoch's people. The earth was in turmoil. It was filled with violence, and people rallied to Enoch and his message, and they became a city of refuge. If you didn't want to take up your sword against your neighbor back then, you went to Zion. It's going to be the same in the last days.
Yep, exactly. So that actually is a couple of verses down here a little bit. Let's do this in verse 35. And I said, said unto them, be not troubled, for when all these things shall come to pass, ye may know that the promises which have been made unto you shall be fulfilled. So the Lord's telling us that He's made promises and they're going to be fulfilled. And this is how you're going to know. As they are becoming fulfilled, you're going to know that His time is coming, and it's very short here.
And one thing on that, I know we're trying to zip through this, but I just want to remind everyone, when the prophet told us, study the promises and covenants the Lord has made with the house of Israel. And if you do, you'll be amazed, He said. That's what He's talking about here.
Yeah. Do you want to go into that just a little bit?
We got miles to go.
If we have time.
And that's not a short conversation.
No, it isn't. Okay, so let's go to let's see, verse 38. Even so, it shall be in that day when they shall see all these things. In other words, these signs that the Lord has given us. Then shall they know that the hour is nigh. So here we have again the Lord's telling us that we're going to know when this is close, when this is about to happen. And verse 39, and this is one of my favorite. It says, it shall come to pass that he that feareth me shall be looking forth for the great day of the Lord to come, even for the signs of the coming of the Son of Man. So if you love the Lord, if you know that these are things that you believe are going to happen, then you're going to be looking for them, and that great day is not going to overtake you like a thief in the night. So there we go. Verse 40, and they shall see signs and wonders, for they shall be shown forth in the heavens above and in the earth beneath. So this is going to be signs in the heavens, but also signs within the earth. And I think what we're going to see is convulsions of the earth. Now, let me ask you a quick question. How much convulsing of the earth do you think there would be if you had other planets coming in and basically docking with our planet? The city of Enoch, the 10 tribes, the city of Salem. If all of these different planets are coming, they're actually docking together. What kind of calamitous situation do you think that would cause?
Not just an earthquake. You're talking about something wobbling like a drunken man or like a chased crow. I mean, you're talking something
Yes.
more than earthquake.
Yep. And it says, and they shall behold blood and fire and vapors of smoke before the day of the Lord shall come. The sun shall be darkened and the moon be turned into blood and the stars fall from heaven. It's going to, all of those things are excellent descriptions of, the kinds of calamitous events that we're talking about here. We talk about the sun being darkened. People go, well, that could be like a volcano and all the smoke from a volcano and how it actually darkens the skies and so forth. That's still thinking globally. With the sun's darkened, that could also be another planet getting in the way of the sun's rays as it's trying to hit the earth and causing a sun shadow over the earth. There's other things like that. The moon shall be turned to blood. I think they're talking about blood moons here, and the signs of the blood moons, and the stars fall from heaven. How do stars fall from heaven? We know the stars are in their place. How do they fall from heaven? Well, from our perspective on the earth, it will look like that if the earth starts spinning erratically, right? Then the stars are going to be all jumbled up in the heavens from what we normally would see if the earth is basically spinning erratically from these either near collisions or whatever that's going on, or this return of the 10 tribes and the city of Enoch and city of Salem stuff.
Yeah, hey,
and
Rob,
the remnant shall be gathered into this place.
One thing real quick on that, the stars falling from heaven. You've been talking about these fragments. Well, Parley P. Pratt said in the Millennial Star, there will be no stars falling to heaven. Stars can't fall to heaven. They're huge. Said this is referring to portions of the earth that have been separated. And when they return, it's going to, you're going to have this bright object coming. That's what he said in the Millennial Star when he was writing to Joseph Fielding Smith, who asked him that question. So I thought that's pretty interesting, and it goes hand in hand with what you've been talking about.
Well, and what was it that was said earlier on in the Doctrine and Covenants? It said, and what will the world say? It's a comet or a planet. It's going to be a planet coming, is basically what. Now, when is this all going to happen? Well, that should be happening at the end of the cleansing of the Promised Land of America. That's the 7-year Shemitah cycle that I've talked about in the past. When this has to happen before the great meeting at Atonement, where the all 12,000 each of the 12 tribes get together, and all of the keys of the priesthood are turned back to the Ancient of Days, or Father Adam, and then he returns all the keys back to Christ. And at that point, Christ is going to begin reigning personally upon the earth, but it's not his triumphant second coming. It's the coming before that, when all the tribes are now back together on the earth, and the earth is as like it was before the days it was separated. Let's see. And then verse 48, and then shall the Lord set his foot upon this mount, and it shall cleave in twain, and the earth shall tremble and reel to and fro, and the heavens also shall shake. So the mount that I think he's talking about here is the Mount of Olives, if I understand it correctly. This is in Jerusalem here, and this is after the battle, or right at the end of the Battle of Armageddon, the first Battle of Armageddon. This is the armies of Gog and Magog are gathered together. They are all allied together. The entire world is basically allied against who? The two promised lands, America and Israel. And those two promised lands are standing as allies against the rest of the entire world. And when the world can't bring America down, when they can't completely destroy America, then they'll turn their attention to Israel, and it will be Israel that then they are under siege and attack And it will be then at Israel that the Lord actually makes his triumphant return. And his feet touch down on the Mount of Olives. It cleaves in twain. It breaks in two. And then the earth is going to really feel some crazy stuff going on apparently at that point in time. Let's see. Let's go to verse 51. Then shall the Jews look upon me. So as we understand it, when the Mount of Olives cleaves in twain, when it breaks in half, essentially, then Christ will be coming down onto that point, and then he will walk over through the east gate of the old city of Jerusalem. And when he enters in, the Jews are going to look upon him and go, he's this is it. This is Christ. He's finally come. And then they're going to look at him. He says, what are these wounds? What are these wounds in your hands and in your feet? And what's he going to say to them? He's going to say, these wounds are the wounds with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. I am he who was lifted up. I am Jesus that was crucified. I am the Son of God. And they're going to realize that they have made a serious miscalculation, that they listen to their leaders rather than to the scriptures and to the Lord. So they blew it. They're 2,000 years off, and so here's Christ coming in, and they're going to go, wow, yeah, we really messed that one up, didn't we? But he's going to take pity on them, and then he's going to fight their battles for them. It says that their weapons of war will burn for 7 years after Christ gets through with the armies of Gog and Magog. And that will usher in essentially the millennium and his millennial reign, and Christ will reign personally upon the earth from that time forward for the next 1,000 years. And then verse 56 and 57, and at that day, when I shall come in my glory, shall the parable be fulfilled, which I spake concerning the 10 virgins. For they that are wise and have received the truth and have taken the Holy Spirit for their guide and have not been deceived, verily I say unto you, they shall not be hewn down and cast into the fire, but shall abide the day. So those who are trying to follow the Lord and look for the signs and watch for that, they're going to be prepared. Does that mean that they're going to all be saved? I don't think so. I think that there'll be a lot of people who are going to go to the next life, the next stage, and hallelujah, But they said for those who have the Holy Spirit to be their guide, they're not going to be deceived. So let's kind of just we need to wrap this up. We got just a couple more things here. And verse 62, verily I say unto you that great things await you. Ye hear of wars in foreign lands, but behold, I say unto you, they are nigh, even at your doors, and not many years hence, and ye shall see wars in your own land. So he's kind of, to some extent, wrapped up this whole part. When he's actually come back in these verses in chapter 52. So he's talking about his second coming. Then he's kind of returning back to Joseph Smith's time in his day. So there's going to be wars in your own lands. And sure enough, it wasn't very long after this when we had the Civil War happen that went through that area. I love the description here about the inhabitants of Salem. Again, this was in Joseph Smith's line. What was the one thing that set them apart from other populations? They were of one heart and one mind. And he talks about that in verse 65. With one heart, with one mind, gather up your riches, that ye may purchase an inheritance which shall hereafter be appointed unto you. And verse 66, and it shall be called the New Jerusalem. And I love this description here. It's a land of peace, a city of refuge, a place of safety for the saints of the Most High God. And the glory of the Lord shall be there, and the terror of the Lord shall also be there, insomuch that the wicked will not come unto it, and it shall be called Zion. Well, why would the wicked not come unto it? Because the people are so righteous that they will have no effect on these people. And apparently they're going to be gathered together for strength and for safety. And verse 68 says, it shall come to pass among the wicked that every man that will not take up his sword against his neighbor must needs flee unto Zion for safety. And there shall be gathered out unto it out of every nation under heaven. And it shall be the only people that shall not be at war with one another. And it shall be said among the wicked, let us not go up to battle against Zion, for the inhabitants of Zion are terrible, wherefore we cannot stand. And it shall come to pass that the righteous shall be gathered out from among all nations, and shall come into Zion singing with songs of everlasting joy. that sounds like a pretty awesome time. Zion being, the world will become so wicked that everybody will have to, they will have to leave. If you're a decent person and you're not going to be willing to go out and start killing and causing mayhem and terrorizing everyone else, that your really only option is going to be, I've heard of this place, this city, and these people, and they are living in peace and prosperity, and they are working with each other and helping each other. And the only way we're going to survive is if we can go, if we can get there, if we can be there. Now, I think that do you think that this is talking about just kind of philosophically, or do you think this is a literal place?
This is absolutely literal. I mean, this we are not talking about creating Zion in our hearts right now in our neighborhoods and wards, which
Right.
hopefully we're doing. Hopefully we're striving for that. But there are so many prophecies and promises regarding the New Jerusalem that it is absolutely literal. And I want to read you one verse that's about the New Jerusalem in Ether, the book of Ether. And because there's something very unique about there's lots of things that are very unique, but Moroni started writing some of the things that he's read in the 24 plates, and then he said, "Hey, I can't say anything more than this. I've been told to knock it off." It's in verse 3. This is Moroni saying what Ether said, and that it, meaning this land, was the place of the New Jerusalem, meaning America is the place the New Jerusalem will be, which should come down out of heaven. John also saw the New Jerusalem descending out of heaven as a bride adorned for her husband. You've got two different people seeing something spectacular pertaining to the New Jerusalem. And in the when Christ is explaining the New Jerusalem to the Nephites, he says, this remnant of Jacob that's going to come amongst you, they're bringing the New Jerusalem, and then you can help them build it up, but it's coming with them. So there's some things about this that we need to think deeper on. And one more promise, or it's not really a promise, it's a description that the Lord gave about the New Jerusalem in the last days. And I find this absolutely fascinating. This is in Moses chapter 7. And the Lord, this is the same chapter where the Lord was weeping over his children, and where Enoch said, the city of Enoch has been populated from people from all thy creations. Now in verse 63, and the Lord said unto Enoch, then shall thou and all thy city meet them there, meaning we are going to come down and be with the people, the residents of the New Jerusalem. And we will receive them into our bosoms, and they shall see us, and we will fall upon their necks, and they shall fall upon our necks, and we will kiss each other. So there's this incredible reunion from people that have had similar experiences of gathering from absolute chaos into cities of refuge, just at different epochs in the Earth's history, but the same circumstances. And then in verse 64, this is the one that just blows my mind about the Lord's description of the New Jerusalem. And there shall be mine abode, and it shall be Zion, which shall come forth out of all the creations which I have made. There it comes again. So here we're saying, Zion is going to come forth from all the creations I have made, which just in this chapter we learned, millions of earths isn't even the beginning of this. So there, God is the God of the universe, and things that are coming are going to be so far beyond the scope of what we think now, because we look at everything like this.
With our finite minds. In fact, I was going to bring up to the verse 62. Towards the end of verse 62, it says, and righteousness and truth will I cause to sweep the earth as with a flood, to gather out mine elect from what? Not the four corners of the earth, but the four quarters of the earth. unto a
Yeah.
place which I shall prepare a holy city, that my people may gird up their loins and look forth with the time for the time of my coming. For there shall be my tabernacle, it shall be called Zion, a new Jerusalem. And so this is if you take the four quarters of the earth, and those four quarters are earth as it is today, and then you have the city of Enoch, the city of Salem, and the 10 tribes, and all of those quarters of the earth are coming together, as he says here, to prepared a place, unto a place which I shall prepare, a holy city. That means that the earth is going to be essentially 4 times its original, its size now. That was its original size. Those pieces have been removed. They're all going to come back together, and all this is going to happen before Christ comes.
Which is why it's going to rival the Exodus of Egypt.
Yeah, but this has got to happen before the big meeting at Atonement, right? So because well, it doesn't have to, but I mean, you would think it would be.
I think that's why you're going to have so many people here,
Yeah.
because I mean, there's so many incredible things that are talked or that are alluded to in this chapter and in many other chapters, but unless you ask yourself questions and then try to get answers from the Lord, you're not going to be ready. You're going to be like half of the virgins, the 10 virgins that didn't have oil in their lamps. They were invited, but they weren't ready for what happened.
Okay, well, we need to wrap this up. So a couple of quick things I want to reiterate. If you would like to go into a little bit more of a deep dive into some of this information, Michael has information. Tell us your website again, Michael.
The lost10tribes.com, and the 10 is a 10.
Yes. Yep. It's the numerical, not written out 10. Okay. And also if you want to go back in these podcasts, go back about 3 or 4 weeks ago and had a whole 4-hour presentation on the last days timelines, which talks a lot about these kind of things. Also have this is the DVD. It's called the Book of Mormon Current as the Daily News, which goes into some of these items as well. We have that on a special right now in our bookstore. I think you can get these for normally $20, and I think you can get them for $5. So then also we want to encourage everybody, if you've been going on the streaming website and watching the conference and all the other information that's there, we apologize. We've been having some technical difficulties with the website, so just be patient with us. We're going to get it back up here shortly, and then. So we're excited about that. If you want to learn more from Michael's information here, you can download the book. Actually, you can download it right from the website, and or you can watch on the podcast. You can also go to the streaming website, and you have was it 3 or 2 presentations that.
Yeah, I did a talk on Ezra's Eagle, the Lost 10 Tribes, and then on just the general events of the last days.
Yeah, so there's tons of information that you can get from that. We hope that you'll take advantage of these resources, and we will see you next week. We are excited about these podcasts, and hope that we can continue to keep these going on here as things get more and more strange. But anyway, thank you, everybody. I hope you're having a good springtime here if you're in the northern hemisphere, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.